Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are merging the streams around here with big appreciation to all of our sponsors, including Leonard Raskin and Raskin Global, who will be joining us this week, as will Bill Cole at Cole Roofing and our friend Todd Schuler from Blondell Miller Schuler and DamnGoodLawyer.com. And, of course, the venerable Dennis Colazzos, heard here each and every Thursday from 3 until 5 and on Sunday mornings as part of the former Sunday Sports Voice. Our sponsors, our partners, including our friends at Taharka. I saw Steve and the guys at Taharka. They gave me a whole bunch of ice cream to bring home the other night, including some they have some like private stock secret flavors I'm not supposed to tell anybody about. So I'll just keep pimping the key lime pie. And, Luke, I might have even picked up an extra pint of chocolate love and honey graham for you and Chris Pica as well. Both of you were at the game on Monday night. How about that? You and Pica were at the game Monday night. I'm watching Steve Young on TV. I felt really, really bad about that when the fireworks were going off out the window and I'm putting pictures up. And then the fireworks started on the field, and, you know, the magic of Mahomes and where Lamar is, we'll be talking about that as we go down the Ral John later on this week. But I want to go Jimmy the Greek here and go about the intangibles, because there was heresy spoken across the land last week that somehow Justin Tucker's not the best kicker in the NFL. And on national TV, the young man got a victory from the Kansas City side, but he missed a couple of kicks on Monday night, didn't he?
Yeah, I would say that was absolute. That qualified for being a prisoner of the moment when people were suggesting that Harrison Butker might be the best kicker in the NFL. I mean, come on. Look, I Monday night aside, I do think he's a really good kicker, but we're talking about Justin Tucker here. And you know me, I've said for years, I don't know what else to say about Justin Tucker because he's been the best. He's very likely going to go down. If he does this for another 6-7 years at the very least, very well could go down as the best kicker in NFL history. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So, look, Harrison Butker, 58-yard field goal to win in San Diego. Los Angeles, impressive. Nonetheless, very impressive. I give him full credit, but I think Monday was a nice little reminder. A missed field goal to end the half and missed extra point. A little reminder that, come on, guys. We can compliment people without saying silly things, and that definitely qualified as silly in my book.
Having a good week is not a good career.
Yeah, and I mean, Justin Tucker, good night for him. We've talked about Devin Duvernay. I mean, 93-yard kickoff return for the touchdown. I mean, just think where the game would have been if that hadn't happened. So, I mean, if you're looking for positives, and there aren't a lot, we're not going to be too wishy-washy. We've spent a lot of time talking about the bad, but the special teams, specifically those two guys, and the blocking for Duvernay as well, it looked pretty good. And that's, if there's one area of this team, offense and defense gets all the attention, and understandably so, but I do think they've cleaned up their special teams across the board. Last year, remember, kick coverage, that Jets game late in the season, that Thursday night game, kick coverage was terrible. They've cleaned up some of those issues, and they've been really good in that department. Now, it didn't really matter as it related to Monday night, but if we're looking at something, wanted to give a brief tip of the cap to Justin Tucker, Duvernay, and the special teams for, I suppose you could say the one phase of the game that came to play on Monday night.
Well, I think picking up the pieces in the aftermath of this is where we're going to probably talk about coaching, right? And I saw Spags on the other sideline and Andy Reid, and it was one big all in the family with John and nobody in the stands. And, early in the aftermath, you said John was outcoached, that the Andy Reid side did a better job. Obviously, the celebrating offensive coaches when the tackle catches a touchdown pass, and you can hear the reverberation of that throughout the stadium where nobody's there. But they won a Super Bowl last year, and Andy Reid's been climbing this tree for a long, long time, waiting to get himself another Donovan McNabb, or in this case, a Patrick Mahomes going into his prime. $450 million later, right? All of that Mahomes shows that. This is where Harbaugh sort of rallies the troops after Andy beats a quick retreat out of town. Now we're in second place. Now we're a wild card team. Now we're giving chase. Now we're on short rest. This is where John usually earns the big bucks, right?
Yeah, and I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it, and we'll talk about this probably for the next couple of weeks, because I don't think a win over the Washington football team is going to have anyone in Baltimore excited and saying, "Oh, the Ravens are fine. There's no issues."
They're back.
Right. I mean, it's going to be and that's what's frustrating about the Ravens losing this game. They have a long, thankless journey ahead of them that I think is going to include plenty of wins. I'm not down on this team that suddenly they're only mediocre or they're not a contender in the AFC or anything like that. No, they lost to the best team in the NFL on Monday night. And yeah, it was a bad performance. There's no way to sugarcoat that, but it's week 3. And this team still does have a lot of talent. And you look at the schedule and you look at how they played the first couple weeks against Cleveland, who's 2-1 now. And look, I'm not buying into the Browns, but they're 2-1 now. Houston, I mean, they're 0-3, but look at the schedule they've played. The Ravens are going to win a lot of games. But I said that it's a thankless journey because we've talked about this and we'll continue to talk about this. There's going to be such a feeling of been there, done that with all of this. And we talked about this some after the playoff loss, if you recall. When you accomplish everything they accomplished last year in the regular season, awards, records, 14-2, 12 straight wins, all of that, best record in franchise history, best point differential in the NFL since the 2007 Patriots. I mean, across the board, they did everything, short of going 16-0, they did everything you can accomplish in a regular season. You lose the playoff game. In week 3, you have a chance to atone against the team that's beaten you each of the last couple of years. Now you just have a schedule of 13 games, and I think they're going to be fine, and they're going to win so many of these games, and they're probably going to blow out a bunch of teams like we saw last year. But everything's going to keep coming back to January and Kansas City and this team being able to play better when they fall behind and not getting out of sorts the way they do and not getting out of sync and not being flat or however you want to describe what happened on Monday night. There's going to be a lot of dismissing of anything they do for the foreseeable future because it's all going to come back to what happens in January. It's all going to come back to you didn't beat Kansas City. And look, there's elements of that's kind of unfair, but you're a victim of your own success at this point. When you're as successful as they've been since the moment Lamar Jackson took over, the standard has been elevated at this point. Winning games in the regular season is great. Don't get me wrong, it's really fun. But ultimately, legacies are defined in January, and they just have a really long way just to get there. And that's not to say that I'm picking Pittsburgh to win the division now or anything like that. That hasn't changed in my mind. But it's just a really long journey ahead now. And we talked about the mental effect of this loss potentially. And even going into this game, I thought this one was important for their psyche. I compared it to the Ravens finally beating Jacksonville in 2000. Or I compared it to the Ravens being able to, finally Joe Flacco going on the road and having comeback drives at Pittsburgh 2 years in a row and how that set up for what they did in 2012 ultimately and beating the Patriots early in that Sunday night game in 2012. I thought this game was such a great opportunity to be one of those types of moments for this football team. And not only did they not succeed in winning, I mean, they got their butts kicked. So I think they'll get off the mat, and I think they'll be fine. And I think they're going to blow out Washington, and I think they'll probably handle Cincinnati pretty well and make Joe Burrow look more like a rookie than he's looked in some of these performances. But each of those games, you're going to look at it, and the skeptics, they're just going to shrug. And you know what? There's not really a whole lot the Ravens or Ravens fans can do to argue against that at this point.
Well, this is where you say, like, all right, where was the offense on Monday night? Where was Hollywood? Where was Mark Andrews?
Yeah.
Where was Ingram? Where was the running game? Where was the razzle-dazzle? Where was 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 1 and 2nd and 3 that they got they were in 2nd and 7 and 3rd and something, and they were in a lot of bad down and distances. They got off the field. Now, how does that work this week when they go back out there and water bug it around, and put 43 up against the Redskins on Sunday, right? Like, they're probably going to come back and make this look easy, right? Like my answer to this would be they're not going to play the Chiefs next week, and therefore they'll look more like the Ravens in the future. But because I do find it easy in the aftermath of a bad game to say, where's Marshall Yanda? Do they need more tight end? Where's Nick Boyle in all of this? And where's the accuracy of Lamar? And we can yell about the pass rush on the defensive side. But I'm just talking about the offense in providing the track meet that we all wanted on Monday night. The offense came up short. I expected the defense to get sliced up. I expected Deshaun Elliott to get his feelings hurt a couple of times. But I expected Lamar to be able to answer and put 34 of his own up.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly Lamar's got to take his share of the blame, but look at their
They
wide
had
receivers.
3 points on offense halfway through the third quarter, right?
I of course. But I also look at it, Ravens wide receivers combined for 7 catches for 32 yards. Kansas City had 5 players with 60 or more receiving yards. Just look at that juxtaposition right there. McCole Hardman for Kansas City had done nothing the first 2 weeks. You know why? Because he's on my fantasy football team bench, and I was monitoring what he did. He's barely even playing. He catches a touchdown in this game. Their 4th and 5th options are viable playmaking type players. And the Ravens, what did they get from Marquise Brown? Not much. Dropped a couple passes. What did they get from Mark Andrews, who was a Pro Bowl tight end last year, and everyone loves him, and he's played his butt off the last couple from the moment he joined the Ravens. But what did they get on Monday night? A bunch of drops. They got they got nothing from Willie Snead. They got very little from Miles Boykin. Duvernay, the little bit that he got involved did some nice things. Maybe
I think
that's
Willie Snead's great when you're running the ball. If you're counting on Willie Snead to catch 6 balls, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, typically not. I'll go back to one of the.
Well, that's going to have to happen when you're losing by 14 points, right?
Well, and that's the thing, and right? that's where when we talk about this passing game, we talk about this offense when they are functioning at their absolute best, and I mean across the board, not just the running game or trying to separate the running game from the passing game. This offense and Lamar Jackson functions at its absolute best when they are running the football and they are throwing it when they want to. Not when they feel they have to or when they need to because they're trailing by a lot. And they kind of lose their poise. And, Greg Roman has to be thrown into that conversation because they did abandon the run awfully fast there in the first half when they were, 6 carries for 60 yards on that opening drive. So you can certainly question, is there enough playmaking talent compared to what Kansas City does with, their number 3 and number 4 wide receivers even. That's fair. We talked about that in the offseason. It's one reason why the Ravens drafted 2 wide receivers. But is there enough playmaking ability there? And we've talked about the ability to make plays outside the numbers and pushing the ball down the field. And they did some of that against Cleveland, and that was a really good sign, but it was one game. And this was the litmus test, right? This was the game to kind of the best thing they were going to be able to do to test their championship medal, going up against the defending Super Bowl champions. And we saw the Ravens playmakers and pass catchers really come up short in that department. So does that mean they need another receiver? And I know people will probably throw out Antonio Brown's name, but, not saying him, but they might need another wide receiver. And, depending on how you're going to go about doing that, we'll see what happens between now and the trade deadline. But it was definitely eye-opening that they did so little with their passing game. We can keep talking about the Titans game because that was the playoff loss and everything, but even in that game, they were still moving the ball and getting yardage. And yes, they had some inopportune mistakes. Just at the worst possible times, those games that flip win probability that the football nerds like to talk about, like me. But they moved the ball still pretty consistently throughout that game, even with falling behind multiple scores to Tennessee. But they didn't move the ball even. They just had so many drives where it was just empty. Whether it's 3 and out or maybe they get one drive, they got a first down because of a holding penalty, but that was it. It just wasn't nearly enough there. And you just look at your wide receivers, and when your wide receivers combine for 32 receiving yards on 7 catches, and meanwhile Kansas City has 5 guys with 60 or more receiving yards. That's
you're
a problem.
Lucky you ran back a kick.
Right, exactly. That really, we've said it, and look, at some point we're piling on, and we're still trying to have some perspective that it is week 3, and even some of the best teams.
They are the best team.
Kansas City's the best team in the league, and they proved that once again. And I think this was I think for the Ravens and even for Ravens fans, I think so many people wanted to just buy into the idea that the Ravens had a really bad night against the Tennessee Titans. But this is a pattern now at this point. That's not to say the Ravens won't get over the hump against Kansas City at some point. That's not to say the Ravens won't win playoff games in January. It's not to say the Ravens can't win the Super Bowl this year. I'm not at all saying that, but I think this performance, not to lose, but to lose in the manner in which they did, is eye-opening from a standpoint of, I think you now have to go back to that playoff loss and not be quite as dismissive as saying it was a fluke. You know, I think there was
losses. Put them both in there because they were pretty similar games.
And they were, but I'm still giving Lamar Jackson credit from. I mean, the leap he made from year 1 to year 2 was just so astronomical that it's almost, you know, he wasn't even supposed to be playing at that point. I mean, that was supposed to be a redshirt
team.
Year.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, but I think I think the fan base, there was very much an expectation and a belief that they were going to come out here in 2020. This was going to be the redemption tour, and it still can be. I want to be very clear about that. But the thought was the Ravens were overwhelmingly the best team in the NFL in the regular season last year. I mean, all the analytics sites, point differential, record, number 1 seed, all of that. I mean, all of that supported it. Best offense in the NFL, a defense that was, you know, top 3 or 4 by the end of the season. When you look at it statistically from mid-October on, I think there was a thought that, all right, they stubbed their toe against Tennessee. It was a major upset. It was a fluke. It was an absolute choke job, however you wanted to describe it. But they're going to come back out there and they're going to very quickly reestablish themselves as the best team in the NFL. And, well, they could have done that Monday night if you go out and beat Kansas City. Not only did they fail to beat them, they got their butts kicked. So that's where you do look at this and say there's something. I don't want to say it's the DNA because that would imply that you might not be able to change it, and I'm not at all suggesting that. But this is a football team that, as successful as they've been, as many games as they've won, and as few games as they've lost over the last couple of years, they've got a reputation now for when things aren't going well early on, they really lose their composure and poise. And that's where players
Lamar
and coaches.
Right now. That's going to come in on Lamar at the end. And
I'd even say the coaching staff, though, too. I mean, look, John Harbaugh's won a Super Bowl. Yes, I'm not saying John Harbaugh's a bad coach by any means, but you do look at them across the board with coaching decisions and play calling and the players. I mean, it feels right now they've got a rep. And Marlon Humphrey said this after the playoff loss to Tennessee, that we've got a reputation that we choke. And, you know, I don't know if this was a choke. I think, I mean, they just got their butt kicked by a better team. At least on Monday night they were. Kansas City was clearly the better team, but you know, they're earning a reputation now that they're going to have to fight that, you know, the kind of that team that's really good in the regular season and, you know, not getting the job done in the absolute biggest of big games. I mean, you know, whether you're use an NBA analogy, the Houston Rockets, or I mean, you just whatever sport you want to throw out there.
Pick the bridesmaid, right?
I mean, it's just they look fantastic against the lesser teams, but then
here's one thing I will say: it's one thing to get bounced by the Titans, who run over you with a running back and had a little something special going on last year, or even the Chargers with a veteran quarterback when you're playing with Joe Flacco's offense. We're now getting into the point where they haven't even seen Kansas City in a game in January, right?
Yeah.
And now whatever the reputation would be, whenever that game is, week 1, week 2, week 3 of January, assuming that, you know, the Ravens right the ship and beat these bad teams that are still going to be 12-4 or 13-3 or whatever they're going to be. And they're going to have their hands full with Pittsburgh in a couple of weeks. And you pointed out Joe Burrow, and, you know, they got to go play Cam Newton. They got to go play Phillip Rivers. They got to go play some teams that are winning some football games right now. But the Chiefs thing, they better hope they can get to that, right? They haven't managed to be able to play the Chiefs in January because they haven't been able to endure whomever is put in front of them. The Buffalo Bills are going to be one of those teams, and it might be 12 degrees when you go to Buffalo in January, which you might have to do at this point. And Josh Allen looks like he's on the come. So this isn't just about Mahomes or just about Lamar. It's about however the tournament sets up in January. And do you really think you're going to win 3-4 football games in January, February by being out in front by 17 points every week? Because the league works like, hey, you're down 13-3. Give yourself a pat on the ass and go out there, lead a drive, get yourself back in here, and give yourself a chance to win in the fourth quarter. That's been a problem for Lamar, right? Like, that is a Lamar issue that we don't know what it looks like when he's down a couple of touchdowns because we don't see it very much. And when we've seen it, we have not seen them come out of that hole. And for me, that's what my eyes will be watching between now and January is how do you overcome Buffalo in week 1 or week 2 to even bother to get to Kansas City again? Because Kansas City pretty clearly will be waiting at the end of the line, not at the front of the line. If you get them first, it's because you're probably not very good to begin with.
Yeah, and that's fair. And one thing we haven't brought up throughout our discussion and breaking this game down, Lamar Jackson, and I flat out asked him, I said, Lamar, you guys ran the ball really well on the opening drive. What were you seeing? What were they doing that you just could not get the passing game in sync whatsoever? And he flat out, he offered this. So it's not fan football junkies trying to draw conclusions here. And I haven't had a chance to see the all 22 yet. I'll take a look at that the next couple of days. But he said that Kansas City did a lot of things that the Titans did in the playoff game last year. Now, they dropped the safeties a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. They really condensed the middle of the field. And what did we see? Lots of passes to the outside that were not upfield. You're talking, these dink and dunk. On the one third down play, it was a pass to Willie Snead for no gain.
Yeah, I don't pan very many third down plays on Twitter, but I'm like, that's a play call that was set up for failure for me.
So the point is, you're looking at this now, and I'm going to be very clear here. I think the narratives where, people have, quote, figured out Lamar Jackson, I think that's a lazy narrative. Tom Brady's had bad games over the course of his career. Peyton Manning had bad games over the course of his career. Patrick Mahomes will have bad games, maybe not many, but will have bad games over the course of his career. But I think we're starting to see this game, Tennessee, Buffalo in December had some success with this. We saw the 49ers have some success with this. Teams, I think, are starting to figure out some best practices to keep the Ravens from hanging 40 or 50 on you. Now, doesn't mean the Ravens still won't have a great offense. And believe me, some of these elements, you have to have the horses to do it. You have to have, if you're using some of those scrape concepts for the read option plays that, a linebacker, you've got to be able to, you can't let Lamar Jackson get the corner on you in those scenarios. And when he does, he runs for 30 yards. And we saw that on a couple occasions on Monday night. But, are we starting to see a few more teams figure this out? And make no mistake, these are teams that have to be very disciplined. They have to be well coached and have coaches who understand how to call a defensive ball game. And they have to have the necessary athletes. So,
the way to beat Lamar is to make him throw the ball, right? And if he throws it better than you think he can, he'll beat you, right? And
you have to make him throw to the outside. Yeah. If you let him throw down over the middle, he's going to carve you up. I mean, he's absolutely shown that. But if you can condense the middle of the field, and not that Kansas City took the run away. I mean, the Ravens kind of took the run away from themselves, and then got to a point where it was too late, and they had to throw the ball and use up tempo. But if you
the word is abandon.
If you can condense the middle of the field, if you can compress the middle of the field, and Dean Pease's defense with Tennessee did so well with that, they kind of ran almost a 3-3 look, and those 6 players were in between the tackles. But you have to have the athletes and the safeties that can protect the edge and not let Lamar Jackson get out in space and let him run for 40 yards. But you have to have the discipline. You have to have the coaching, and the X's and O's and calls at the right time and a good feel for that. And you need to have the athletes. Now, of the 31 opponents, the 31 other teams in the NFL, there aren't that many that can do all of that. But I think we are starting to see a few more teams be able to do this. Kansas City doesn't have their defense was terrible against the Chargers the previous week. They couldn't stop the run. Their running backs had over 100 yards receiving against them. They had their issues. This Kansas City's not regarded as having a great defense, but Steve Spagnuolo had a good defensive game plan, clearly copied some elements from what the Titans did. And the Ravens, fall behind, an offensive line that's not used to just pass protecting, almost exclusively the way they had to. And, you kind of see the house of cards fall, and I don't want to say house of cards implies that their offense isn't legitimate. They have a very legitimate offense, but there's a very specific formula for how they like to play. Much like we've talked about Navy and the triple option for years in college football, you take them out of that element, that's going to be the key now for the Ravens. When they're taken out of that element, they've got to be able to function at a higher level, or this is going to continue to happen to them because guess what? January, you're playing the best teams. You're playing good teams. And all right, maybe the first round, maybe if you're the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed, yeah, you're going to play that 7 seed now with the expanded playoffs. Maybe you'll be fine, but sooner than later, you're going to be coming up against those teams that have scouted you, and they've got the horses to slow you down a little bit. And that's where the Ravens have got to find a way to be able to adapt and not lose their poise in those scenarios. That goes for the players, and that goes for coaching as well.
I almost said the red team from Washington. I almost said ahead this week.
I do feel sorry for Washington because I think Sunday's going to be ugly, and Ravens fans are going to feel better in the short term. And look, it's not going to mean anything for the big
Luke,
picture.
I never thought about this. We've beaten the Redskins for the last time, right? We'll never beat the Redskins again.
It's
right?
strange, right?
Well, the Washington football team is this week, then the Bengals, then the Eagles, then the Steelers, and we get them and then a bye. And somewhere in these next 4 weeks to wake up and say, we're 6-1 or, whatever that would be, especially if you beat the Steelers and you feel that good about it, maybe that would be like last year and winning in Seattle and you get a week off and you feel really good about yourself. But it's going to be a little while before the Ravens feel really good about themselves, even if they're 5-1. And that's the strangeness of 2020 and losing to Patrick Mahomes. You can find all of our coverage at IndyBuyAToyota.com, Audio Vault, at WNST.net. We are merging the streams to Baltimore Positive right around the corner. At some point, you're going to go to the website and say, wow, look at that. Look at how big Luke's picture got on the web. All of our videos are out there. All of our stuff's out there. All of our sponsors are out there. Big appreciation for everybody taking us from WNST.net 2.0 to Baltimore Positive 3.0. You can find Luke at WNST.net. In Baltimore, Luke, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. We never stop talking Baltimore Positive.